At the break of dawn, the Kansas prairie stretched out like a rolling sea, every blade of grass painted silver by the morning dew. The horizon was a thin pink line, slicing the endless sky, promising another hot day in the heartland. Underneath an ancient cottonwood tree, Evelyn Brooks sat quietly in her battered wheelchair, a faded blue ribbon clutched between her trembling fingers. She wore a light sweater, even though the air was already warm. Her bones always ached in the mornings, an old complaint she no longer bothered to voice. For most folks in town, Evelyn was a ghost, an old woman whose glory days had blown away decades ago, just like the wild prairie wind. But to herself, Evelyn was still the girl who once ruled the saddle, her hair flying behind her, ribbons trailing from her hat as she crossed the finish line. She could still hear the distant roar of applause, taste the dust in her mouth, feel the wild, pulsing joy of life before it all changed. But those days felt impossibly far away now. The prairie had become a lonely ocean, and Evelyn its stranded castaway. Her days were measured by the rise and fall of the sun, the slow procession of birds, and the memories that flickered through her mind like ghostly lanterns in the dusk. She talked to herself, sometimes to the tree, sometimes to the wind, never expecting an answer, and almost always disappointed. On this morning, though, as she watched the sunrise burn away the last traces of night, Evelyn felt a strange restlessness. Her hands, spotted with age, gripped the blue ribbon tightly. This was her most precious relic, a symbol of everything she once was. The loneliness inside her chest swirled, sharp and raw, leaving her feeling both empty and desperate, as if she were standing at the edge of something immense. And then, in the golden light, the world shifted. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow at the far edge of the meadow, where the grasses grew wild and tall. She squinted, thinking it was just her imagination, some trick of the dawn. But the shadow moved, dark and fluid, making the birds scatter into the air. A horse. No, not just a horse, a wild mustang. Jet black, with a mane like a thundercloud, the stallion stepped quietly out from the curtain of tall grass. He paused, head high, nostrils flaring, black eyes fixed on Evelyn, as if he'd been summoned by her longing. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the hush of the prairie wind and the thrum of Evelyn's heart in her ears. She didn't dare breathe. The mustang was unlike any horse she'd ever seen, larger, prouder, raw with untamed power. His coat shone in the sunrise, muscles rippling with every cautious step. He stood at a safe distance, wild and unbroken, every muscle tense, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. Evelyn felt a tremor run through her body. All her years fell away, and she became the girl at the gate again, hopeful, breathless, filled with a longing she'd almost forgotten. She raised her trembling hand, clutching the blue ribbon as if it might anchor her to the earth. The mustang didn't move. He just stared at her, his gaze steady and impossible to read. Was it curiosity? Was it fate? Evelyn's breath came shallow and quick. She whispered softly, not sure what she hoped for. "Hey there, boy. It's just you and me now, isn't it?" She remembered the stories her father used to tell her, back when she was a child. Tales of wild horses who appeared at moments of great change. Spirits of the prairie come to guide the lost or test the brave. She had always laughed at those old legends, but now, alone in the dawn, she wondered. Why had he come to her now, when she needed hope the most? As the sun climbed higher, painting the meadow in bright gold, the mustang tossed his head, mane flying. For a heartbeat, he took a step forward, closing the distance by the barest inch. Evelyn felt her breath hitch. She could see now he was young, but there were scars on his body, marks of old battles, maybe a recent wound near his flank. There was a wild intelligence in his eyes, a pain she recognized from her own reflection in the window at night. Something passed between them, something silent but deep, an understanding that came not from words, but from the ache of loneliness and the desperate need for connection. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a spark inside her chest, a flicker of hope, fragile and electric. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, to find in this wild creature a kind of salvation for them both. But the Mustang wasn't ready. He turned, hooves thudding softly in the tall grass, and vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving only a ripple in the wind and the promise of something new. Evelyn slumped in her chair, the blue ribbon falling into her lap. She stared at the place where the horse had stood, her heart pounding with a strange, new energy. What drew this Mustang to her? Was it a sign, or simply the whims of fate? Evelyn didn't know, but for the first time in a very long while she wanted to find out. As the prairie came alive with the songs of birds and the first light of day, Evelyn made a silent promise, to herself, to the Mustang, to whatever spirit watched over the silent meadow. She would wait, she would hope, and if the wild horse returned, she would not turn away. Unbeknownst to her, the Mustang's arrival would change everything. But for now, Evelyn sat beneath the old cottonwood, the blue ribbon in her lap, and watched the horizon, alive with possibilities, her heart fluttering with the beginning of something she didn't dare name. The meadow was no longer silent. Not truly. Something had shifted, and Evelyn could feel it in the wind, in the earth beneath her wheels, in the pulse of her own heart. The story had begun, and she was ready, whatever it might bring. The first rays of the next morning found Evelyn restless and wide awake. Sleep had not come easily. All night, she'd replayed the vision of the black Mustang over and over, questioning if it had really happened, or if it was another cruel trick of her memory. But the tracks in the dew, just beyond the reach of her wheelchair ramp, told her it was no dream. The wild horse had been there, drawn to her loneliness like a moth to a dying ember. After her morning routine, struggling with her pills, a cup of weak coffee, the creak of the old house, Evelyn was pulled back to the window by the same magnetic force she'd felt at dawn. Today, though, she had a plan. She rummaged through her small kitchen, hands shaking, until she found a bunch of carrots that had been destined for a stew. Instead, she tucked them into her lap and wheeled herself out across the uneven porch. The air smelled of cut grass and possibility. Evelyn took a slow, cautious path across the ramp, the wheels of her chair bumping on the boards, every movement sending little jolts up her arms. She moved with purpose, all the way to the edge of her yard, where the field opened up wide. The spot beneath the cottonwood, where she'd first seen the Mustang, was already bathed in sunlight. She waited and waited. The prairie seemed silent, except for the distant croak of crows and the rustle of grasshoppers. The carrots felt heavy in her lap, the minutes stretching thin. Doubt crept in, slow and poisonous. Maybe yesterday had only been a mirage, or maybe the horse had no reason to return. Just as she was about to give up, the wild Mustang appeared again, silent as a shadow, stepping into view from the tall grasses. The black stallion's mane rippled, and he paused, just out of arm's reach, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Evelyn's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She pulled a carrot from her lap, and with all the steadiness she could muster, held it out in her trembling hand. Their eyes met. The world narrowed to that single fragile connection. the offering and the acceptance, the risk and the trust. Evelyn dared not speak. Her breath caught in her chest, hope and fear wrestling inside her. The Mustang hesitated, hooves pawing uncertainly at the earth, his wildness warring with his curiosity. With infinite patience, Evelyn whispered, "It's okay, boy. Nobody's going to hurt you here." The stallion took one cautious step forward, then another, drawn by the scent of the carrot and something deeper, something wounded but longing in both of them. Finally, his velvet muzzle brushed her fingers, just for a split second. Evelyn felt the jolt like a current, soft and electric, as if she'd reached back into her own past. The Mustang's lips closed around the carrot, crunching, eyes never leaving hers. In that instant, she gave him a name, spoken only in her heart. Midnight. The connection was shattered by a harsh human sound, someone yelling across the fence. Evelyn flinched, and Midnight jerked his head back, muscles tensing to bolt. "Evelyn!" The shout came from Tom Harris, her neighbor, a big man in a faded ball cap, arms folded, face like thunder. He leaned over the fence, voice carrying all the suspicion and authority of the small-town old guard. "You see that wild one again? You better drive him off. Those horses are nothing but trouble. Somebody's going to get hurt. Or worse, your place'll be swarmed with them." Evelyn bristled. She felt her spine stiffen with a long-forgotten defiance. Tom had always been quick to judge, quicker to act like he knew what was best for everyone else. But this moment was hers, and she wouldn't let him ruin it. She called back, her voice wavering but strong. "He's not hurting anybody, Tom. He's just passing through. Leave him be." Tom shook his head, lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't be a fool, Evelyn. Wild ones bring coyotes, break fences, and scare cattle. Drive him off before someone else does, or you'll be sorry." With that, he stomped away, muttering curses under his breath. The silence that followed was brittle. Midnight watched Tom's retreat, nostrils flaring, then turned his wary gaze back to Evelyn. For a moment, the two stood together in a fragile truce. One woman, one wild horse, both outsiders in their own way. Evelyn knew what everyone in town would say. She was soft in the head, living in the past, a burden on the neighborhood. They'd whisper about her behind closed doors, shake their heads at the crazy old woman and her wild dreams. But for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't care. With her heart pounding, she broke off another carrot and held it out. Midnight hesitated, uncertain now, but his hunger and curiosity won out over fear. He inched closer, lips brushing her palm again, before snatching the carrot and retreating a few feet, watching her with those deep, knowing eyes. Evelyn knew, with bone-deep certainty, that she couldn't betray this horse. Midnight had come to her not just out of hunger, but out of some mysterious mutual need, a chance for them both to heal. She'd been given a spark, a purpose, a new connection to the world that everyone else had tried to strip away. Tom's warnings echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. This was her land, her life, and for once she would decide what mattered. As the morning sun climbed higher, Midnight melted back into the tall grass, only his black mane visible like smoke on the horizon. Evelyn sat for a long while, her lap empty but her soul strangely full. She whispered a promise into the wind. "You have a friend here, Midnight, no matter what they say." As she wheeled herself back toward the house, the loneliness didn't seem quite so sharp, and the meadow felt less like an ocean and more like a home, alive with new possibility, new risk, and the hope that, even now, life still had more to offer. But deep inside, She knew this act of quiet rebellion would not go unnoticed. Tom's threats lingered, a storm on the edge of the prairie. Was she risking more than she knew? Could an old woman and a wounded mustang really outlast the anger of a town that feared anything wild? Evelyn didn't know. But for now, she felt alive, she felt brave, and she felt ready for whatever came next. The days slipped by in a slow, golden rhythm, each dawn pulling Evelyn to the edge of her property, her gaze searching the sea of tall grass for any sign of midnight. It was as if the prairie itself held its breath, waiting to see what might bloom between the old woman in her wheelchair and the wild stallion she'd quietly claimed as her own. Midnight came back. The first time after Tom's warning, he kept a wide distance, watching her warily from behind a tangle of switchgrass. Evelyn didn't move toward him. Instead, she placed a few carrots on a flat stone near the cottonwood and sat quietly, telling stories to the wind. Stories of the old days, of the horses she'd ridden, the ribbons she'd won, and the family she had once gathered around her. Her voice, though thin and shaky, floated out across the field, mixing with the song of the larks and the low rustle of prairie grass. It wasn't for show, and it wasn't just for midnight. In truth, Evelyn was telling her stories for herself, stitching together a past that sometimes felt more real than the present. She spoke of her father, who taught her to ride by the light of the harvest moon, of her husband, whose laughter had filled the barn with warmth, and of her daughter, gone now, lost to a distant city and a busy life. Each afternoon, midnight crept closer. He moved with a cautious grace, pausing often, ears flicking at the slightest sound. Sometimes he'd only come as far as the edge of the cottonwood's shadow, eyes fixed on Evelyn, as if waiting for her to reveal some secret about the world. Sometimes, if the wind was just right, he'd inch close enough to accept a carrot from her open palm. One morning, when the sun rose through a curtain of mist, Evelyn decided to share the story she had never told anyone, not even Lily, her granddaughter. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I used to ride in the rodeo midnight. Did I ever tell you that?" She smiled, tracing the blue ribbon with her thumb. "I was fearless, or at least I thought I was. My horse's name was Buddy. We could outrun any storm, clear any fence, until the night everything changed." She swallowed, her eyes brimming with memory and pain. It was raining, hard. The arena was slick. They said I should have waited, but I was too proud. I pushed Buddy to leap a little higher, a little faster. I never saw the hole in the ground. He stumbled. I went flying. Next thing I knew, I was staring up at the sky, and I couldn't move my legs. Her voice cracked, but she went on. "They told me I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. Not for a long, long time." The silence that followed was deep, filled only by the soft sound of midnight's breathing. The stallion took another step closer. He was near enough now that Evelyn could see a jagged scar slicing through the black hair on his flank. A fresh wound, angry and raw, as if he'd only recently escaped some terrible danger. She wondered what had happened to him. A fight with another stallion? A run-in with barbed wire? Or perhaps, like her, he'd simply tried to run too fast, too far, and paid the price. Without thinking, Evelyn reached out. Midnight did not flinch. Instead, he lowered his head until it hovered just above her lap, his breath warm on her hands. For a moment, neither moved. The world seemed to pause around them, the prairie holding its breath. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of being seen. She realized, with a sharp pang, how long it had been since she'd touched another living creature, since she'd allowed herself to be vulnerable. Midnight, sensing her pain and confusion, remained perfectly still, letting her rest her shaking hand against his powerful neck. "You're hurt too, aren't you, boy?" she whispered, her fingers brushing the edge of his scar. "Maybe that's why you found me." She leaned her head back, letting the early sunlight warm her face, and, for the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to cry. The tears flowed freely. Tears for the years lost to pain and bitterness, for the friends and family who had drifted away, for the life she'd almost forgotten she'd loved. Midnight stood with her until the tears slowed. Then, with a gentle snort, he nuzzled her shoulder and stepped back, standing tall and unafraid. He was still wild, still full of a strength she could only imagine, but something had changed between them. A quiet bond formed by mutual suffering and a tentative, growing trust. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Every morning, Evelyn found Midnight waiting near the cottonwood. Some days he would let her feed him from her hand. Other days he'd simply stand nearby, close enough for comfort, distant enough for dignity. Evelyn talked, and Midnight listened, his ears flicking at the sound of her stories. She grew bolder, telling him about her accident, about the pain that never fully left her legs, about the way people treated her like she was invisible. "You know, Midnight, they think I'm just an old woman waiting for the end," she confided one afternoon, her voice tinged with irony. "But you and I, we know better, don't we? We're survivors. We've got stories left to tell." With every visit, Evelyn's spirits lifted. She found herself singing again, humming old lullabies and prairie songs. She cooked real meals, even if it was only for herself. The wheelchair didn't seem quite as heavy, the house not quite as lonely. When Lily called from the city, Evelyn told her she was doing fine, keeping busy, and for once it was the truth. Yet beneath all the hope, a quiet fear lingered. Evelyn knew Midnight's wound needed tending, and she worried it might fester. But the thought of anyone else coming near him, of the town or Tom or the sheriff, sent a chill through her bones. For now she trusted in their slow dance of healing, believing that, together, they could mend what the world had broken. That night, as she watched the moon rise over the prairie, Evelyn whispered a prayer for the wild horse with the wounded flank and the soul full of storms. She didn't know if it would be enough. But for the first time since her fall, she felt less alone, and the world felt a little brighter. The past was no longer a prison. It was a bridge, a link to the living, breathing world outside her door. And Midnight, fierce and wounded, was her companion on that journey, both of them learning to trust, to heal, and to hope again. The Kansas summer brought unpredictable storms, fierce and quick, like memories that wouldn't let go. One evening, the sky turned a strange, bruised violet. The wind howled, rattling loose shingles on the farmhouse roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer with each shudder of Evelyn's old weather vane. She moved from window to window, her wheelchair creaking, watching the prairie disappear beneath a curtain of rain. She worried for Midnight. He hadn't shown up that morning, and as the rain pounded the fields, her anxiety gnawed at her, relentless and sharp. She pictured him out there, lost and wounded, his dark shape battered by the storm. It was nearly midnight when Evelyn heard a noise, an uneven thudding on her porch, followed by the low, desperate whinny of a horse in pain. Heart pounding, she wheeled herself to the door and fumbled with the latch. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the porch for an instant. There stood Midnight, drenched and shivering, blood trickling fresh from the angry scar on his flank. For a moment, neither moved. Evelyn felt the rush of fear, the impossibility of what she needed to do. She hadn't cared for a horse since her accident, and her hands were stiff with age. But something in Midnight's eyes pleaded with her, called on that old part of her, the fearless, gentle caretaker. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice barely more than the wind. With trembling hands, she pushed open the door wider and reached for the battered first aid kit she kept on the side table. She pulled out a faded towel, a bottle of iodine, and a handful of gauze. Rain blew into the entryway, pooling beneath her wheels, but she didn't care. Midnight edged closer, his whole body taut with pain and uncertainty. He stopped just short of the threshold, looking from Evelyn's face to her hands, then back to the open prairie. The storm wailed behind him, a wild thing. Evelyn reached out, ignoring the ache in her fingers, and placed her palm against his neck. His skin was cold, his heartbeat a frantic flutter under her touch. "It's all right, boy," she murmured, her tone as gentle as it was decades ago. "I know it hurts. I know how it feels to be hurt and scared." She moved with slow determination, talking the whole time. "When I was a girl, my daddy used to say, 'If a horse trusts you, that's a gift. Don't ever waste it.'" "I'm trying, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm trying now." Lightning flashed again. Midnight flinched but stayed. Evelyn dabbed the wound, cleaning out mud and blood, her hands surprisingly steady in the storm's chaos. He pressed his nose against her shoulder, breath warm and shaky. She worked by lamplight, her own shadow huge and flickering on the porch wall. The wound was deep but not mortal, an old barbed wire injury, maybe torn again in his frantic flight through the night. Evelyn's mind spun with worry, but she kept her hands calm, humming a lullaby that seemed to soothe them both. At last, she wrapped the wound with fresh gauze and tied it with a shaking knot. "There. That should help," she said, stroking his neck. "You'll be all right, Midnight. We both will." She didn't want to leave him, not with the storm raging and the wound still fresh. So she sat beside him, rain drumming on the porch roof, thunder rolling in waves. Midnight sank to his knees and curled up as close to the doorway as he could fit, his sides heaving, his eyes never leaving hers. For hours, neither of them slept, but the fear faded, replaced by something fierce and quiet. Trust, born of pain and care. As dawn broke, the rain finally eased. Evelyn's hands ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The storm had passed, and with it a wall between her and the world had cracked just a bit more. She reached out and stroked Midnight's nose, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you for coming back," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." That morning, as she finished her chores and cleaned up the mess in the entryway, a pickup truck rumbled up the gravel drive. Evelyn frowned. She rarely had visitors, especially unannounced. She opened the front door and saw Lily, her granddaughter, step out onto the porch. Lily was in her early 20s, sharp-featured, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans and sneakers, one arm loaded with groceries, the other clutching her ever-present phone. She looked tired, but when she saw Evelyn, her eyes softened. "Grandma, what's with all the muddy towels and—" She stopped, staring at the wild black stallion dozing beside the porch, bandaged and calm. Grandma, what is that horse doing here?" Evelyn's heart leapt with both pride and panic. "His name is Midnight. He's been coming around. I think he needed help. So did I." Lily's eyebrows shot up. "You let a wild horse onto the porch? Are you nuts? Grandma, you could have been hurt. What if he'd kicked you? What if he's dangerous?" Evelyn braced herself for the fight, but Lily only stared at Midnight, curiosity warring with skepticism. The stallion lifted his head, blinking at Lily. For a moment, the prairie seemed to pause, two worlds meeting on the edge of the old wooden porch. Evelyn wheeled closer. "He's not dangerous, Lily. He's hurt, like me. We're helping each other." Her voice, fragile but certain, echoed with something Lily hadn't heard in years: hope. Lily knelt cautiously and peered at the bandage. "You did this?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. "And you're not scared?" Another nod. Lily glanced back at her grandmother, a new respect in her eyes. "Well, that's kind of incredible, Grandma. But you know people in town will freak if they find out." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I know. But for once, I don't care what they say. This horse, he's given me something I lost a long time ago." Lily reached out and tentatively stroked Midnight's neck. The horse shivered but didn't move away. "He really trusts you," she murmured. "We trust each other," Evelyn said. "That's rare, don't you think?" Lily nodded, subdued and thoughtful. "Yeah, it is." The morning light poured over the porch, washing away the last traces of the storm. Evelyn watched as Lily lingered, her skepticism melting into fascination. Maybe, Evelyn thought, this was a new beginning for both of them, a way to bridge old hurts and find fresh hope. Midnight rested in the shadow of the porch, bandaged and safe. Evelyn's heart beat strong in her chest, a fragile but persistent signal that the worst storms sometimes brought the brightest dawns. The air was heavy with the scent of prairie grass and summer heat, but the peace that had settled over Evelyn's home since the storm was slowly unraveling. By the time Midnight's wound began to heal, thanks to the careful bandaging and late-night care, word had spread across the small Kansas town. First, it was just a murmur at the hardware store, then a half-whisper at the post office. "Did you hear about old Evelyn Brooks and the wild horse?" It didn't take much for gossip to take root in a place where everyone's business was practically public record. The story grew with each telling. Some said the Mustang had charged a dog. Others claimed Evelyn was feeding a whole herd of wild horses behind her house. Some feared for their children or their cattle. A few simply felt a sour jealousy at the thought of something wild choosing Evelyn over anyone else. Evelyn felt the shift in the air before she heard the words outright. She noticed it when she went out to collect her mail and found two neighbors standing by the road, their voices dropping to a hush as she passed. She saw it in the way cars slowed in front of her house, their drivers peering curiously at her porch and her fields. She heard it loud and clear when Tom Harris confronted her again, this time with real anger in his eyes. It was early evening when Tom stomped across the property line, boots thudding on the cracked earth. Evelyn was sitting beneath the cottonwood, Midnight grazing contentedly nearby, Lily scrolling through her phone on the porch steps. Tom didn't bother with small talk. "I told you, Evelyn, wild horses are nothing but trouble," he said, his voice sharp as barbed wire. "You're putting everyone around here at risk. They tear up fences, bring disease, and run off livestock. What if that stallion goes after someone's kids?" Evelyn met his glare without flinching. "Midnight's not a danger to anyone. He's not a rabid animal, Tom. He's wounded and scared, just like a lot of us." Tom jabbed a finger in her direction. "You think the county's going to see it that way? There are laws, Evelyn. Wild horses aren't pets, and you're not running a sanctuary out here." His eyes darted to Midnight, who stared back with the unblinking calm of a creature that had survived far worse. Lily set her phone aside and stood up, her chin high. "Grandma's not doing anything wrong," she said quietly, but Tom ignored her. "I'm calling the sheriff," Tom declared. "And the county. If you won't do something, someone else will." He stomped off, the screen door of his pickup slamming hard enough to make Midnight snort and stamp the ground. Lily rushed to Evelyn's side, her face pale. "What are we going to do? He really means it this time." Evelyn felt a sick knot form in her stomach, but she wouldn't let it show. "We stand our ground," she said, though her voice was softer than she wanted. "I won't betray Midnight's trust. Not for Tom, not for anyone." That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Evelyn wheeled herself through the darkened house, checking the locks and pulling the curtains tight. She knew how quickly things could turn in a small town. One angry voice could become a chorus, and good people could be swayed by fear. She heard movement outside, a low shuffle near the front steps. Her heart leapt, but when she looked out the window, she saw only Midnight standing sentinel in the moonlight, his head turning slowly as if listening to the prairie itself. But the next morning, a new kind of fear arrived. There, tacked to her door with a rusty nail, was a piece of scrap paper. The words were scrawled in angry block letters. "Get rid of the Mustang, or we will." Evelyn stared at the note, her hands shaking. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt around her. She closed her eyes and steadied herself, then pulled the note free and crumpled it in her fist. Later, as she sat with Lily at the kitchen table, she slid the note across the cracked linoleum. Lily read it, her face darkening with anger. "That's a threat, Grandma. They can't do that. We should call someone." Evelyn shook her head, her voice low and steady. "Who would we call, honey? The sheriff? He'll be on their side. Tom's already poisoned half the town against us. No, if we're going to protect Midnight, we'll have to do it ourselves." They talked long into the afternoon. Lily suggested hiding Midnight, maybe driving him out to the far side of the property. But Evelyn knew it wouldn't be enough. The prairie was too open, and word had spread too far. Every day brought new cars crawling past the house, new rumors swirling through town. Evelyn felt the weight of the town pressing in on her. Every glare, every muttered warning, every memory of the times she'd been written off or ignored. But this time, she refused to be silent. "They're afraid of what they don't understand," she told Lily. "They see something wild, and all they can think about is how to control it or drive it away. But sometimes, what we fear most is exactly what we need." One afternoon, the county animal control officer drove up, a stern-faced woman in a tan uniform. She introduced herself as Officer McLeod. She looked over the property, asked a few questions, and wrote some notes on a clipboard. "There's been a complaint," she said, "about a wild Mustang causing trouble. I need to see the animal." Evelyn nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Midnight's not a threat. He's been hurt, and I've just been helping him heal." Officer McLeod studied Evelyn's face for a long moment. Then Midnight, who stood quietly nearby, bandage still visible on his flank. "I'm not here to cause trouble, ma'am. But you should know, if the county gets enough complaints, they'll send out the sheriff and animal control. The Mustang will have to go, one way or another." Evelyn's voice was clear, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I understand, officer. But until someone makes me, I won't turn him away." The officer's expression softened for a moment. "You've got guts, ma'am, but be careful. People get desperate when they're scared." After she left, Evelyn sat with Midnight in the fading evening light, running her fingers gently over his neck. "I won't let them hurt you," she promised, though she could feel the prairie closing in around them. As the days passed, tension built to a fever pitch. Friends who used to wave from their trucks now turned away. Someone tossed an empty beer can onto her lawn. The threat of violence simmered just below the surface. But every morning, midnight returned, trusting her, choosing her, as if their bond was something unbreakable. Evelyn held on to that hope, even as fear grew in the shadows. She had lived too long to back down now. She would fight for midnight, even if it meant standing against the whole town. In her heart, she knew. Sometimes, the wildest things were worth fighting for. The prairie heat broke late that week, as it always did in Kansas. One minute, the air shimmered with summer haze, and the next, a violent storm boiled up from the horizon, swallowing the sunlight in an angry sweep. Evelyn felt the change before the clouds arrived. The wind turned restless, bending the tall grasses in waves. The cottonwood leaves clattered together, warning of what was to come. That evening, Evelyn sat at her window, eyes tracing the movement of the clouds and the distant flicker of lightning. Her heart beat heavy with worry. Midnight hadn't come that morning, nor had he appeared at sunset for his usual carrot and gentle greeting. Evelyn tried to tell herself he was fine, simply out exploring the endless fields. But the knot in her stomach only tightened as the storm drew closer. Lily was visiting for the weekend, her suitcase sitting open at the foot of the bed. She found Evelyn in the kitchen, staring at the old wall clock as thunder rattled the windows. "You're worried about him, aren't you?" Lily asked, pouring 2 mugs of tea. "He's a tough one, Grandma. He'll be all right." Evelyn shook her head, her hands trembling as she reached for the mug. "He's wounded, Lily. If that storm scares him into the old fence line, he could get trapped. I should have checked on him sooner." A fresh crack of thunder echoed across the fields, followed by a heavy, relentless rain. The world outside faded to gray and black, the wind howling against the battered porch. Evelyn wheeled herself to the back door, straining to see through the sheets of rain. "I have to look for him," she said, her voice trembling not from age, but from fear. "Grandma, it's dangerous out there," Lily protested, but Evelyn was already pulling on her raincoat, determined and stubborn as ever. Lily grabbed a flashlight and a rain jacket. "All right, I'm coming too," she said, not about to let her grandmother go alone. Together they ventured into the storm, the wind clawing at their clothes, the earth slick beneath their feet, lightning slicing the prairie into ghostly blue shapes. The search seemed hopeless at first. The beam of Lily's flashlight barely pierced the driving rain. They called Midnight's name, their voices swallowed by the wind. Evelyn's wheelchair bumped and jostled over the muddy ground, her arms aching with every push. For long minutes there was nothing but the storm, the shriek of the wind, and their own rising panic. Then Lily stopped suddenly. "Wait, did you hear that?" Evelyn strained her ears. Through the roar of the rain came a desperate, ragged cry, the unmistakable sound of a horse in pain. They followed the sound, the flashlight bouncing wildly in Lily's trembling hand. At the far edge of the property, where an old section of barbed wire had been swallowed by the tall grass, they found him. Midnight was trapped, his hind legs snarled in a cruel tangle of rusty wire. He reared and twisted, eyes rolling white with panic, blood streaming down his flank. Every movement only made the wound worse, the wire cutting deeper. The fear in his eyes was wild and raw, and Evelyn's heart broke at the sight. Lily dropped to her knees, hands searching for the end of the wire. "It's okay, boy, we're here, hold still," she cried. Evelyn wheeled as close as she could, her voice steady and low. "Midnight, listen to me. You have to trust us. Easy now. Easy." The storm battered them all, but Evelyn's words found their way through. Midnight stilled for just a moment, long enough for Lily to slide her jacket over his head and blindfold him. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out her old pocket knife. Tiny, dull, but better than nothing. Her hands shook, but she worked methodically, sawing at the wire as Lily murmured soothing nonsense into Midnight's ear. Time slowed to a crawl. Every second, the threat of pain, the threat of another bolt of lightning. Every second, the knowledge that ranchers, Tom Harris and his friends, could appear, guns in hand, ready to do what they thought was necessary. At last, the wire snapped. Lily pulled it free, tossing it aside. Midnight stumbled and nearly fell, but Evelyn reached out and pressed her palm to his trembling neck. "You're free, boy. You're safe." Blood ran down his leg, but he was standing. He nuzzled Evelyn's shoulder, eyes closing in exhaustion. She wept, the rain hiding her tears, her whole body shaking from the effort and relief. But their victory was short-lived. The beam of headlights sliced through the storm, followed by angry voices. A pickup skidded to a halt, doors slamming. Tom Harris's voice rang out, sharp and furious. "Step away from that horse, Evelyn. You're making things worse. That animal's dangerous, and you're putting everyone at risk." A crowd of ranchers, their faces grim in the harsh light, spread out along the fence line. Several of them carried rifles slung over their shoulders. The county sheriff stepped forward, his hat pulled low against the rain. "Evelyn, Lily, this has gone far enough," he called. "You can't keep that horse here. You've got a week to find a solution, or the county will step in. And if that stallion hurts someone, it's on you." Evelyn stared at the sheriff, feeling the cold bite of reality. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Midnight, sensing the tension, pressed closer to her side. Lily squared her shoulders, standing between her grandmother and the ranchers. "That's not fair," Lily snapped. "He's never hurt anyone. He just needs time to heal." The sheriff's face softened for a moment, but he didn't back down. "I'm sorry, ma'am. My hands are tied. The law is the law. 1 week. After that, we do what we have to do." The ranchers murmured in agreement, suspicion and fear thick in the air. With a final glare, Tom turned away, muttering curses as he stomped back to his truck. The headlights faded, the threat lingering like thunder after a storm. Evelyn held Midnight's head in her lap, the rain soaking her to the skin. The fear and anger swirling around her were as wild as the prairie storm, but beneath it all, she felt the steady, quiet heartbeat of hope. They had saved Midnight tonight, but the clock was ticking, the world was closing in, and she didn't know if they could hold out much longer. As the storm moved off, Evelyn and Lily led Midnight slowly back toward the house, the stallion limping but alive. The prairie was scarred but not broken, and neither were they. Not yet. Inside, as Evelyn peeled off her wet clothes and bandaged Midnight's wound anew, she made a silent vow. She would not let them take him, not without a fight. She had 1 week. 1 week to find a way out. For herself, for Lily, for Midnight. And as the prairie settled back into uneasy silence, Evelyn understood. Sometimes, rescue meant risking everything you had left, even when the world told you to give up. The days after the storm felt different, sharper, more urgent. The prairie sun was hot, but every breeze carried the memory of angry voices and the ticking of a clock counting down. For the first time, Evelyn was truly afraid, not just for herself, but for Midnight, whose fate now hung by a thread stretched taut between compassion and fear. Midnight's wound was healing, but the stallion was limping badly and remained skittish. He refused to wander far from the house, staying close to the cottonwood or lurking near the porch when Evelyn or Lily came out to feed him. His trust was there, but it was fragile, shadowed by the pain of the wire and the memory of men's anger. The town's tension grew thicker by the day. A few neighbors now drove past slowly, watching, sometimes pausing long enough for Evelyn to see the worry or suspicion etched across their faces. Others, she noticed, began avoiding her altogether. Only Officer McLeod came by, her presence almost a comfort now, though her message remained the same. "The clock's running, Evelyn. Don't wait until the last minute." Each morning, Evelyn and Lily met on the porch to talk. Their voices stayed low, even in the privacy of their own home, as if the wind itself might carry their plans across the fields to unfriendly ears. "We have to do something," Lily said, frustration raw in her voice one muggy morning. "There's no way they'll let him stay, Grandma. Not after what happened in the storm." Evelyn nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I know. But what can we do? I can't hide him, not with so many eyes watching us. And we can't just turn him loose. If he's caught, they'll—" Her words failed her, but both women understood. Lily bit her lip, her mind racing. She opened her phone, scrolling rapidly. "There are sanctuaries, Grandma. Places that take in wild horses, keep them safe. There's one over in Osborne County, not too far, less than a day's drive." Evelyn's heart jumped at the idea, hope flickering to life. Could they take him? Would they? "It's worth asking." Lily called the number listed on the sanctuary's website. Evelyn listened as her granddaughter explained their story. Careful, but honest. "He's wild but gentle, hurt but healing. He trusts us," Lily said, glancing at Evelyn for reassurance. The woman on the other end, a kind voice named Maria, listened closely. "We can help," she promised, "but it needs to be quiet. The less the county knows, the better. We'll bring a trailer and a vet. Dawn is best, before anyone's watching." After the call, Evelyn felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The sanctuary was a solution, but it meant saying goodbye. She looked out at midnight, grazing beneath the cottonwood. He raised his head, meeting her gaze as if sensing the shift in her spirit. That night, as the house grew quiet, Evelyn rolled out onto the porch, a blanket around her shoulders. The prairie was cool, insects singing in the tall grass. Midnight moved from the darkness, his black shape materializing at her side. She spoke softly, stroking his neck. "We have to get you out of here, boy. They won't let you stay, and I can't protect you any longer. There's a place where you'll be safe, where you'll be free." Midnight's breath was warm on her cheek. She pressed her forehead to his, tears welling up in her eyes. "You woke something up in me, made me feel alive again. I wish you could stay forever, but you deserve more than fear and hiding. You deserve a herd, open land, and safety. I hope you understand that I'm not giving up on you. I'm giving you a chance." Every evening after that, Evelyn spent time with Midnight, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting quietly beside him as the stars appeared overhead. She apologized for what was coming, thanking him for trusting her, and promising to see him through to a better place. Lily joined her, bringing apples and carrots, rubbing Midnight's ears, helping him feel comfortable with the trailer that would soon arrive. Meanwhile, they worked in secret. Lily coordinated with Maria and the sanctuary, planning every detail to avoid alerting their watchful neighbors. They gathered supplies, prepped Midnight with gentle handling, and arranged for the vet to sedate him just enough for safe travel. They even practiced backing the wheelchair ramp up to the edge of the driveway where the horse trailer would park, rehearsing every move for speed and stealth. "Everything has to happen before sunrise," Lily repeated. "If Tom or the sheriff see what we're doing, it could ruin everything. We need to get him loaded, paperwork signed, and be on the road before the town wakes up." Each evening, Evelyn watched the sun dip below the horizon, nerves crackling in her chest. The closer the day came, the more she worried about the risks, the possibility of failure, the pain of parting from the horse who had become her companion, her purpose. But she drew strength from Lily's resolve and from Midnight's quiet courage. They were a team, 3 wounded souls bound by hope and necessity. The final night before the rescue, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat at the window, watching Midnight graze in the silver light. The house was filled with an aching quiet, the anticipation of what was to come and the sorrow of goodbye. Lily found her there in the darkest hour before dawn, both women too restless for words. At last, Evelyn wheeled out to Midnight for one last conversation, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "I'll always remember you, Midnight. You reminded me that life isn't over just because it's changed. You reminded me how to fight. I hope you'll remember me too, in that wild place you're going." Midnight pressed his nose to her chest, and Evelyn laughed through her tears, holding him close. The prairie wind was gentle, carrying away the last of her fear. She felt, for the first time in years, ready for whatever might come next. As the sky began to lighten, signaling the approach of dawn, the plan was set. The rescue team would arrive soon. Evelyn whispered her final words to the horse who had changed her life. "Be brave, Midnight. Be free." And with that, their secret rescue began. One last act of defiance and hope beneath the watching eyes of a town not ready to understand. Long before sunrise, the world was hushed and waiting. The prairie seemed to hold its breath as Lily's car headlights swept softly across the driveway, guiding Maria's animal rescue trailer to a stop at the edge of the property. Evelyn sat waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes wide open in the darkness. She hadn't slept, nerves burning through her fatigue. Midnight, sensing the tension, lingered near the cottonwood, pacing in restless circles. Maria stepped out, a no-nonsense woman with a calm, reassuring voice. She was joined by a young vet named Dr. Rios, who moved with practiced gentleness and spoke in quiet tones. They worked quickly, checking Midnight's bandages and preparing a light sedative. Lily whispered instructions, double-checking their plan and keeping an anxious eye on the road for any sign of headlights from a nosy neighbor, or worse, Tom Harris. As the first pale light crept into the eastern sky, they brought Midnight toward the trailer. He hesitated, nostrils flaring, his wild spirit not easily calmed even after weeks of gentle care. Evelyn rolled her wheelchair close, speaking softly. "It's all right, Midnight. You can trust us. Just one more journey. Then you're free." She reached out and touched his neck, her hands steady with determination. Midnight took a few uncertain steps forward, drawn by her voice, then paused at the ramp. The trailer loomed like a dark cave, unfamiliar and frightening. Lily stood on the other side, holding an apple, calling softly, "Come on, boy, you can do this. We're right here." Dr. Rios administered the sedative, just enough to take the edge off Midnight's fear, but not enough to dull his awareness. The stallion blinked slowly, his ears twitching as Evelyn continued to whisper encouragement. Step by cautious step, Midnight placed his front hooves on the ramp. His weight shifted, the trailer creaked, and for a tense moment, everyone held their breath. Just as Midnight seemed ready to leap away, trouble arrived. The roar of a pickup engine shattered the fragile peace, and Tom Harris's truck appeared at the end of the driveway, dust and gravel spraying as he braked hard. The porch lights from a neighboring house flicked on. A couple of townspeople, drawn by the commotion, emerged onto the road, some in pajamas, faces drawn with suspicion and anger. Tom jumped out, voice booming in the stillness. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Evelyn? You can't just take off with that wild animal. He's county property now. You need to let us handle this." A knot of fear twisted in Evelyn's gut, but she didn't back down. With her granddaughter and Maria at her side, she drew herself up in her chair and fixed Tom with a steady gaze. "He's not a problem, Tom. He's a miracle. He's never hurt anyone. You just can't stand that something wild chose to trust me instead of you." The tension thickened. The townspeople closed in, muttering among themselves. One woman clutched her robe tighter, whispering about danger and liability. The sheriff's squad car rolled up next, sirens silent but lights flashing, casting red and blue over the dawn. The sheriff stepped out, looking tired and wary. "Evelyn, what's going on here?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "We're taking Midnight to a sanctuary where he'll be safe. He's done nothing wrong, and neither have we." Tom spat on the gravel. "You don't have the right. He's not yours to save." Maria stepped forward, paperwork in hand. "The Brooks family has arranged a legal transfer. This is all above board. The sanctuary has approved it. The vet has checked the horse, and the animal is in no danger. If anyone interferes, you'll be the ones breaking the law." A standoff followed. A tense, breathless moment where anything could have happened. The sheriff took the paperwork, reading it carefully, then looked at Evelyn with something like respect. "Looks like you've done your homework. If the sanctuary's agreed and the horse is leaving county lines, it's not our problem anymore." Tom glared, but the crowd was silent now, uncertainty warring with lingering anger. Evelyn locked eyes with her old neighbor. "He came to me when I needed hope the most, Tom. I won't let you take that away. Not from me, not from him." With a final defiant nod, Evelyn turned to Midnight, her voice trembling but strong. "It's time, old friend. You're going home." With one last burst of courage, Midnight stepped onto the ramp, guided by Lily's gentle encouragement and Maria's calm presence. The trailer rocked as the stallion settled inside, his eyes wide but trusting. The rescue team secured him safely, and Dr. Rios gave the all-clear. Evelyn watched as the doors closed, the thud echoing through her chest. For a moment she thought her heart might break, but then she saw Lily, face streaked with tears, but smiling with pride, and knew they'd done the right thing. The truck and trailer pulled away, leaving the angry neighbors and Tom's bitterness behind. The sheriff nodded once, tipping his hat to Evelyn, then drove off. The crowd dispersed, grumbling, but there was no more fight left in them. The prairie returned to silence, broken only by the soft sounds of mourning and the distant rumble of the departing truck. Evelyn sat on her porch as the first rays of sun touched the horizon, Lily by her side. They watched until the rescue trailer vanished down the county road, carrying Midnight toward the sanctuary and a future full of open fields and wild freedom. The tears came then, tears of relief, grief, and joy all tangled together. Evelyn pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the empty ache of loss, but also the fierce satisfaction of standing her ground, of saving a friend no one else understood. "You did it, Grandma," Lily whispered, her arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "You really did it." Evelyn nodded, eyes fixed on the endless prairie, heart swelling with pride and bittersweet hope. "No, Lily, we did it. We gave him a chance. That's all any of us can hope for." The sun rose higher, painting the world in gold. Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of dew and wild grass. She knew there would be challenges ahead, more storms, more doubt, more whispers from the town. But she also knew that she had found courage she thought she'd lost, and in helping Midnight, she had healed a part of herself she'd almost forgotten. And as the world came alive with birdsong and the promise of a new day, Evelyn smiled through her tears, grateful for the miracle that had galloped into her life, and for the strength she'd found in loving something wild. The rescue trailer rolled west as the sun finally broke over the prairie horizon, flooding the world in gold and rose. Evelyn watched it disappear down the country road, her chest tight, her hands resting motionless in her lap. The silence after the storm of neighbors and sirens felt both strange and holy, like the hush after a prayer. Inside the house, the air was thick with the aftershocks of the morning's drama. Lily made coffee for them both, her eyes red and swollen, but shining with relief. Evelyn barely tasted hers, too consumed by the images burned into her memory. Midnight's wild, trusting eyes, the weight of his head against her chest, the way the dawn light had gilded his black mane as he stepped into the trailer for the last time. They spent the day cleaning up, folding towels, wiping mud from the kitchen floor and sweeping away traces of hoofprints from the drive. It was as if, by setting the house in order, they might bring some peace to their own restless hearts. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them was soft, no longer heavy with worry. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was Maria from the sanctuary, calling to say they'd arrived safely. "He's resting in a big open pasture with other horses nearby. He's wary, but he's eating and moving well. Dr. Rios says his leg will heal with time. He's got a whole new world to explore." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words settle in her chest. "Thank you, Maria. You gave him a future." "You gave him hope," Maria replied. "We'll send photos and updates. You're always welcome to visit. Take care, Evelyn." When Evelyn hung up, she realized she was crying, gentle tears, full of both loss and gratitude. Lily hugged her close, and they sat together, watching the long prairie shadows creep across the living room floor. Later, as evening settled, Lily suggested they visit the sanctuary soon. Evelyn agreed, but insisted she needed time to say goodbye in her own way, to process the empty spot midnight left behind, the new quiet in the fields outside her window. That night, alone in her room, Evelyn reached for her old blue ribbon, pressing it to her lips as memories flooded back. The first time she'd seen Midnight's dark silhouette at sunrise, the trembling trust in his eyes, the healing that had happened for both of them, bit by bit, hoofbeat by hoofbeat. She whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Midnight. You gave me life again. You reminded me that love means letting go, even when it hurts." She placed the ribbon on her nightstand, a talisman of all she'd gained and all she'd surrendered. The next morning, Evelyn asked Lily to help her outside. They wheeled together beneath the cottonwood tree, where wildflowers bloomed and the prairie wind carried the scent of freedom. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt the sun on her face, imagining Midnight running free, no longer bound by wounds or wire or fear. "I hope he remembers us," Lily said softly, breaking the quiet. "He will," Evelyn replied, her voice sure. "He'll remember the touch of kindness. Animals always do." Lily nodded, looking out across the field. "I learned something from him, Grandma. From you too. That fighting for what's right isn't always easy or popular. Sometimes it means standing up alone, even when people don't understand." Evelyn squeezed her granddaughter's hand, pride welling up inside her. That's the only way real change ever happens, one stubborn heart at a time. As the days passed, the story of Midnight spread further than either of them could have guessed. Lily, inspired by their journey, shared photos and updates online. Their story resonated, first with friends, then with strangers. People sent messages of encouragement and thanks. A few even reached out to ask about wild horse advocacy, or to share stories of their own lonely relatives, inspired by Evelyn's courage. One letter arrived from a little girl in Missouri. Dear Miss Brooks, thank you for helping Midnight. My grandpa is lonely too, and now I visit him every week. I think wild horses are beautiful. I want to help them someday. Love, Emma. Evelyn kept the letter taped to her fridge, a daily reminder that kindness could ripple far beyond what she'd ever imagined. On a bright Sunday, Lily drove Evelyn out to the sanctuary. The road wound through open land and rolling hills until finally they reached wide white fences and the distant shapes of horses grazing under a boundless sky. Maria met them at the gate, all smiles. He's doing great. Want to see him? Evelyn's hands trembled as they wheeled her through the grass toward the pasture. At first, she worried Midnight might not remember her. But as she approached, he lifted his head, ears pricked, and trotted to the fence. He nickered, a sound of recognition, softer than thunder, but full of warmth. Evelyn reached through the rails and stroked his cheek. His eyes, deep and dark, reflected her own tears. You did good, boy, she murmured. You taught me what it means to heal, to love without holding tight, to let go for the sake of someone else's freedom. Lily stood close by, tears shining in her eyes. She watched her grandmother, so strong, so changed, and realized the real miracle wasn't just Midnight's rescue. It was the transformation in Evelyn, the way she carried herself now, unafraid of being seen or heard. As they left, Maria handed Evelyn a folder filled with photos and updates, reminders that their story would continue, even apart. On the drive home, Lily reflected out loud. Healing's a journey, isn't it? Not just for horses or for you, but for all of us. Evelyn smiled, her heart at peace. It is, honey. And sometimes healing means letting go, so someone or something can finally run free. The lesson settled deep in both their hearts. Healing is a journey that often requires letting go, not just holding on. Even those considered broken have purpose, beauty, and the power to change lives. Compassion is courage in the face of isolation, opposition, and loss. The bonds we form, no matter how unlikely, can transform us, heal us, and give us new meaning. And so, as the prairie rolled by their windows, Evelyn and Lily both knew they had changed. Their story would ripple outward, inspiring others to see the wild and the wounded not as burdens, but as blessings. Reminders that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set someone free. Months slipped by, and the memory of Midnight's last dawn at the old Brooks farm settled into the prairie like the hush after a storm. But for Evelyn, life didn't return to the silence of before. Instead, her days bloomed with a new purpose. Each sunrise a chance to share the story that had changed her, and quietly was changing her whole community. It started small. The local newspaper ran a feature about the wild mustang and the woman who wouldn't give up, accompanied by a photo of Evelyn at the sanctuary fence, hand outstretched to a black stallion with a half-healed scar. The article described not only the struggle to save Midnight, but the bigger truths behind the story. Loneliness, the bonds between people and animals, and the courage to care when no one else would. Then a teacher at the town's elementary school called. "Miss Brooks, would you come tell your story to the kids?" the teacher asked. Evelyn hesitated. She'd never thought of herself as a speaker, just an old woman with a stubborn heart. But the memory of Midnight's trust and the hope she'd seen in Lily's eyes gave her courage. She agreed, and on a crisp autumn morning, she wheeled herself into a classroom where dozens of young faces turned to her with curiosity and awe. She spoke simply, telling how a wild horse showed up one morning when she thought her world was over, how she'd found the strength to care for him, and how, together, they'd healed old wounds neither of them could name. She spoke of the challenges, The fear, the opposition, the moments she almost gave up, and how love and kindness had triumphed. She finished with a quiet plea. When you see someone in need, human or animal, don't turn away. One act of kindness can change a life forever. The response stunned her. The children wrote letters, filling her mailbox with crayon drawings of mustangs, thank you notes, and questions about horses, courage, and how to help. Evelyn read each one with tears and laughter. Some children wrote about helping stray cats or visiting lonely grandparents. A few, inspired by Midnight, started a project to collect blankets and food for the animal shelter. Teachers invited her to more classrooms, while local churches and senior centers reached out too, asking her to share her story and, in doing so, remind their members of the power of compassion and resilience. Evelyn found herself busier than she'd been in years. She joined Lily at the sanctuary on weekends, volunteering to help with chores, brushing horses, mending fences, and most importantly, talking with visitors about wild horses and what it means to care, even when you're scared or alone. Each visit to Midnight was a reminder of what she'd lost, but also what she'd gained: a sense of belonging, a reason to get up each day, and a new community that spanned far beyond the borders of her small town. Lily changed too. Inspired by her grandmother, she left her city job and began working part-time at the sanctuary. She found fulfillment in new friendships with people and animals she would never have met otherwise. She even started an online group to connect young people with isolated elders and advocate for wild horses, sharing the story of Midnight and Evelyn far and wide. Over time, attitudes in the town began to shift. Some who had once glared at Evelyn now waved from their trucks. A few neighbors apologized for their anger and asked about volunteering at the sanctuary. Tom Harris never quite warmed up, but he stopped spreading rumors and one day left a bag of carrots on Evelyn's porch. No note, just a gesture of peace. Evelyn's story reached further than she'd ever imagined. A regional magazine picked up the tale. Then a national animal advocacy group invited her to speak via video call. She was nervous, her voice cracking as she described Midnight's fear, his healing, and her own. But the applause at the end was thunderous, and the emails that followed, messages from people across the country who had loved and lost, who had felt invisible but found hope in her words, became a new source of strength. Through it all, Evelyn never forgot her own lesson, that courage isn't loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, sitting with pain, facing loneliness, and refusing to give up on something or someone others have written off. She closed every speech with the words she'd come to believe in her bones. When you see someone, human or animal, in need, don't turn away. One act of kindness can change a life forever. The impact was felt most deeply at home. Lily and Evelyn grew closer than ever, sharing stories and dreams over steaming mugs of tea. Lily's friends visited, filling the old house with laughter. Evelyn received letters from children and adults alike, telling her how they'd chosen compassion, even when it was hard. On a chilly winter morning, Evelyn wheeled herself out to the cottonwood, the place where her new story had begun. The meadow was silent, but it was a living silence, full of the promise of spring, of wildflowers and galloping hooves, of hope born from hardship. One last time she visited the sanctuary. Maria met her at the gate, and together with Lily, they walked to the pasture. Midnight spotted them, his coat shining and his limp barely noticeable. He trotted over, his eyes bright with recognition. Evelyn reached out, stroking his nose, smiling through tears. "You're free, Midnight," she whispered. "You're the proof that second chances are real, that old wounds can heal, that kindness matters." As they turned to leave, Evelyn looked back one last time. Midnight was galloping across the pasture, mane flying, a wild shadow against the winter sky. He was a living symbol of everything she'd learned, that the courage to care, even in old age or isolation, can create ripples of hope in a community. That true freedom comes not from escaping pain, but from facing it, sharing it, and using it to fuel compassion. That small acts, one wild horse, one lonely woman, can ignite lasting change. Evelyn carried that lesson with her always, and though the years continued to pass, and though sorrow and loss would visit again, she faced them with the steady heart of someone who had loved, let go, and been transformed. Her story became a call to action, a living reminder to all who heard it that even the smallest act of kindness, on a silent prairie, in a crowded classroom, or in a stranger's heart, could change the world.